This is a brand new cinematography breakdown for a commercial that I shot for Cobalt for Lowe's. So Cobalt tools, they make like power tools, all kinds of cool stuff. If you're sawing wood or, putting like a nail in a ladder in, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Power tools, right? You've seen power tools before, right? So this was mostly lifestyle, family oriented, right? So nothing like super crunchy, nothing super contrasty or moody, right? Basically something you would see on like television, right? Or scrolling through Instagram and you've been looking at power tools and you might come across a Cobalt power tool ad, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down just a couple of scenes. These are just really just frame grabs I took from the footage as I was just hired for to be the DP for the day. So I'm just taking frame grabs from the day and kind of going over the lighting setup and seeing what went right, what went wrong, and the tools went behind the thought process of how do we create shape, how do we create interest, shooting pretty much day exteriors the entire day from like 8 a.m. all the way until 8 p.m., right? So let's hop in and we're going to jump into this first shot here. Basically, we'll just call this like the opening shot. And if I go into, let me double check that I got some action here. Cool. All right. So if I can come here, this is basically the setup for this shot. Close up, back to medium, close up, and then these shots as well too. The story behind this is there is a dad. Again, that setup, which I'll go back to in a second, is all of these shots here, right? Pretty much this setup. And so the story is a father and a son. The son is looking to create a treehouse, right? He's drawing in his little book, and he's like, "Oh, you know what? I have this brilliant idea of creating a treehouse." So he goes over to dad and says, "Hey, dad, can we create this treehouse?" And dad says, "I don't know." And the kid, is man, it'd be really cool if we made this treehouse. And dad says, "Okay, cool. Let's build a treehouse." And then ensues the process of building a treehouse. Okay. So this setup, ideally, I wanted to shoot this towards like sunrise, right? 6:30, 7 a.m. up until 8 a.m. and be able to close off the ending shots by like 8:30 a.m. because then the sun's pretty high up. Unfortunately, we weren't able to even start shooting until 8 a.m., right? Which means the sun is pretty high up, right? So what do we do in that kind of situation? As you can see here from this forest of grip and diffusion, we have a couple things going on here, right? We have bounce, which is really bringing in most of our level, even though it's not a lot of level. If we had something more, that would be awesome, but we only had a couple of resources on the day, right? We have an 8x overhead of diffusion. We have an 8x solid for neg. We also have some 4x4 floppies in neg, and we have some 4x8 of ultra bounces, right? Ideally, if I had, access to like a 12x12 ultra bounce, that would have helped out a lot. But we only had maybe 3, 4 4x8, which kind of makes it like a 12x12, Anyway, so let's go over this first shot here, right? So we have our talent Jeremiah. He's sawing wood to be able to create a treehouse, right? And so what do we do here, right? The sun is extremely high up, right? Right now, our sun is, I can even kind of get it. Our sun is basically here, right? But this is like, there's no cloud coverage. It's full day. Full daylight, and so the sun is just beating down, right? So overhead we have if I can switch this guy here. So overhead we have, I can make this, we have a 8x8 of, I think it was either full grid or quarter grid, something like that, right? If I go back to our beautiful setup here, right? So you can kind of see it, but we have an 8x8. I don't know. I forgot if it was either quarter grid or full grid, but we have an 8x8 of grid cloth diffusing the sun, right? And as you can see, like, it does look kind of fake because the thing with quarter grid or grid cloth in general is it really diffuses whatever kind of light source that it is being cut in between. Whereas something like a highlight, it doesn't look unnatural, right? The highlight will still like diffuse the lighting source, but not make it look like kind of fake, right? Because right now it looks like he's just like in the shade out of nowhere, right? Whereas here is like, you can tell like pretty hard light, right? And so where does this thing come from? But you know what? Like if I had highlight, I would use it. Unfortunately, we didn't have highlight on the day, so we used our grid cloth, right? So now we have that diffusion covered, but just because you have the diffusion covered, you still need a key side, you still need a shadow side, right? So camera left, let me see how I can do this. Camera left, we have a 8x8. Just go with your imagination, right? I have 8x8 of a black solid here, right? Creating contrast, right? Because we always want to be able to shoot on the shadow side, right? Creating this little shadow side here. And then to camera right, as you can see through all this stuff, right? We just have like, again, a 4x8 ultra bounce, 4x8 of ultra bounce. I think there was another 4x8 of ultra bounce there. We were just trying to get as much as we can, right? Okay. And that's pretty much a setup, right? Again, if I had highlight, this would have been a lot better looking, because then we wouldn't have needed as much ultra bounce like flagging around. Because we're diffusing so much, we need more level pushing back in to make things look in the realm of natural, right? Again, like kind of like set decoration, branding, we have the power tools in the back. At least there is some nice contrast between like the wood, the green, the brown, the white. One thing though is wood, at least on the FX9, I think with most cameras too, wood tends to have like a red tint to it. So because you have sun and ultra bounce hitting the wood, it's bouncing back up and creating red here. So I actually color corrected the skin out because it was a really red. So that's one thing to note is, you know, on the day I saw it and I'm like, nah, it's fucking red, but there's not much you can do about that, you know? Or maybe there is, you tell me. But anyways, we have at least color contrast is here. If we had more level pushing back, that would have been nice, just to, you know, make him the brightest thing in the image. But right now, this is just a pretty nice diffused look, right? And same thing, right? We're going for the medium. Again, we're able to, at least through composition, at least create interest of, okay, you know, this is what we're supposed to be looking at, this guy, and also the power tool. And then here I'm going for coverage. Again, here if I had a little bit more level, we were playing around with the ultra bounces and playing around with the neg. I had more neg on camera left, but unfortunately they thought it was just too much, like too dark. So okay, we pulled back the neg just to let more light in. But again, at least it was an interesting shot. We have all this like sawdust just flying around, particles, right, creating atmosphere for ourselves. The next shot, again, same thing. The sun's starting to leak around more towards camera right, so it's kind of making it more of like a side light than a backlight. But same thing, where we have that going back. We have overhead, we have neg, we have bounce coming in, right, from camera right. So we're still keeping the notion of, okay, this is our key side, this is our shadow side, and how do we create contrast with that with the tools that we have. And you know, the other way to do it is, if you had the budget, is like, say if we go back to the wide, right, if you had like if you had like 2 or 3 6Ks or an 18K, anything with a lot of punch, then you could, you know, punch that through say you're 12 by 12 of ultra bounce, right, and be able to get a lot of level. But we didn't have anything that powerful on the day, so you have to go with bounce light, right? Let's move on. Again, just another close-up of the action of the tools in action, right? So shot's okay. Again, I wish I could have had just a little bit more level, but you know, nitpicking stuff. Again, this shot's okay because at least we have a nice little like diffused backlight on him. Again, I wish I had something just to kind of edge him out, because it's nice and soft light, but it doesn't really like stand out as far as like what you need to look at. Okay, let's go into our overhead coverage now. Now, pretty much the sun is, let me do this. Let me reset everything. Now our sun is really like, again, we're still trying to just like, you know, chase stuff, right? But now our sun is pretty much in this, that is horrible. That is really horrible. Our sun is pretty much here, right? And is beating down on our town here, right? And I will say one thing that can help save you is a polarizer. I use the polarizer throughout the entire day, just to be able to, again, if I want to make the sky richer, or if I want to take down the sky and make this, as far as the level of exposure goes, the most important thing, a polarizer helps out a ton, right? So we had a TIFF and polarizer helping us on the day. But so sun's beating down. Now what we have is we still have our 8x8s of grid cloth just overhead, and actually it wasn't like directly parallel. It was more like at an angle here, right here and here. And the reason being just because if we had it parallel to the talent, it wasn't covering it in a way where like the wood was also part of the wood wasn't covered, part of the shoulder wasn't covered, so it was kind of like it just didn't look right, when you had like hard light here and then soft light. So we had to angle it in a diagonal fashion to be able to create like even exposure, right? And I mean, it's an okay shot, as you can see, it's fairly diffused, but you can see that they're kind of like sitting underneath like shade out of nowhere. So that's kind of like the fakeness of it. We are shooting on the Sigma 18 and 35 T2, right? So we're able to at least use shallow depth of field to our advantage to be able to say, okay, look here and not look at the entire frame. But nice color contrast, between the green and the red. I remember the red, if I can point it out, this red plant here, this is sort of the thing when it comes to conversations with producers and agency that are there on the day. We had like the entire fucking agency was there. There's like 30 people there from the agency. I don't know why. But it was one of those things where, you have too many cooks in the kitchen, right? The director's there trying to direct the talent and tell a story with the storyboards. And then the producer is there and again, everyone has their own opinion, right? And the producer said, hey, is there any way we can frame this thing so that way we don't get this red plant here because it looks too much like Arizona? I'm like, stupidest fucking thing I ever heard. But again, you hear this stuff all the time when it comes to commercial, right? So there's no way, unless we choose to shoot this way, right? But now if you choose to shoot this way, only he gets backlight. If I can do this, right? If we point the camera this way, then only whoever's on the right side is getting backlight, right? And this person would be getting all like front light. We don't want that, right? So after much deliberation and just communication, I told the producer and we had two producers. So I told the producer from the agency and said, hey, this is honestly going to be our best angle for success. Are you okay if we just leave this here because it's such a small part of the frame, like no one's going to look at it. This is like a 30-second ad. No one's going to be looking at anything here. So luckily, the producer said, okay, that makes sense. So anyways, this is the setup that we have, right? Same thing where we have our overhead, our 8x8 of grid cloth overhead. And then I want to say behind camera, right? So behind camera is where we have all of our like floppies and all of our neg, just trying to create shape, right? If you're in a situation where there's just too much room tone and you can't kill it out, the best thing is, again, if you can create one side of neg, great. But if not, I would choose to create the neg behind you, right, behind camera, so at least there isn't light bouncing back towards the direction that the camera is looking. So a little tip there. But yeah, we had just flags everywhere, and again, our 8x8 neg behind. So how do you create shape, right? This is where we bring in the rest of our ultra balances, right? So ultra balance 4x4, 4x8, right? Another 4x8, just trying to create some shape back in here. And then, there is light coming here, so we just let that be our, quote unquote, edge light, right? And I mean, that's pretty much the whole setup, right? Maybe when we go in here, you can see, right? Again, we're using his body to block out our bounces, because now since we're shooting at a different angle, now we have our, again, 4x8 of ultra bounce, and we're using his body to cover all that stuff, so that way we can at least get a key side, and then we can have our again, our shadow side, right? And again, neg along this side here, 8x8 plus another 4x8, just to create shape. Our 8x8 of grid cloth overhead is helping to kill out a lot of the sunlight that would have just been beating down on this entire setup. All right, so I think you guys kind of get the point, right? Is Is anything else in here? No, same shot. Again, same shot, right? Again, this thing, now the sun's creeping overhead. You can see it's hitting the houses in the back. So again, most important part about, day exteriors where you have to shoot according to the sun is choose your key side, choose your shadow side, and then from there, hopefully you have enough either lighting fixtures, that could be bounces, that could be reflectors, that could be mirrors, have your neg, have your foppies on standby to be able to create shape to tell the audience where you're looking at, right? And again, I did an okay job with this based upon what we had, based upon the time of day that we were shooting. And you kind of just use little tricks here and there, like the polarizer, right, to kind of be able to say, hey, look in this direction, okay? And then we move on. Now this I wanted to shoot later on in the day because you can clearly see that the sun is just, it's just beating down, right? It's just beating down this way, right? We're pretty much in full like side light, right? And I wanted to shoot this later on in the day, but we were running so behind with the agency asking, hey, can we get this extra angle? Can we get this extra angle, right? And 10 extra angles adds up to a lot of time, right? Not necessarily time wasted. It just adds up to a lot of extra time that you now need to just kind of come up with, right? So now we are in full sun mode, right? So the most important thing here for me was to be able to get our talents in the realm of exposure, right? And so unfortunately, this is the hottest thing in the image. So you're kind of looking over here and not over here, but they wanted the kid underneath the tree because treehouse, right? So what do we do, right? We have here on camera right is, I didn't know if it would work, but I tried it and I said, okay, you know what? Let's just see if this works, right? We have a 8x8 of, I actually need to do this better. How do I do this better? Okay, we have an 8x8 of poly bounce. Okay, so we have an 8x8 of poly bounce, and then we had what did we have? We had, if I remember correctly, we had a Forza 500, right? So we had a Forza 500 and a aperture 300D, the Mark 1, right? So we had those bouncing into the poly, and that was able to actually get us, and again, they're at 100%, but that was able to get us level back on our child talent here. And without it, the poly wasn't really doing much at all, but there was just enough level, right? So again, 100% intensity bouncing into a poly here. If I turned both lights on him, then it was actually good exposure. It just looked like shit because then you just have hard light coming out of nowhere. So again, if you're in a situation where you feel like there's enough light, but it's just really hard light, you can either diffuse it, or what I like to do is I like to bounce it back in instead, right? So we bounced it, but there was still just like highlight. I wanted to take it down. So then what we did was we put up a little 4x4 of quarter grid, right? And so that 4x4 of quarter grid right out of frame here is giving us just enough level and a softer quality of light to our talent here, right? And then behind camera, again, right? Again, if you can't create the shape that you need directly to your left or directly to your right, try to place it toward, kind of behind camera. But behind camera, we have our 8x8 of neg, just stop the bounce light coming back at our child talent here, right? Because again, the floor is brown too, so then you're getting brown light bouncing back at him. Okay, so that's pretty much, that setup. Oh, what am I doing here? So that is pretty much this setup. This setup over the shoulder, again, we didn't change anything at all. I think we just maybe brought in the neg just a little bit more behind camera, again, to be able to soak up as much light as possible. And then same thing, look here. Now it's like, okay, hey, treehouse. Maybe I can build a treehouse with my dad, huh? Right? And then we go over here, and then I think what we did here, I actually don't remember if we used I think we did use the overhead, the 8x8 overhead of grid cloth. And then to camera right, I don't think we brought in the bounce. I think we were just, I think what we did was we just had two grips, handholds, a 4x4, each of Ultra Bounce to be able to create some shape here. This is just natural edge from just bounce light everywhere here. And then we had our 8x8 neg behind camera to create shape, right? Because, you know, I wanted, and again, through focus, like, you know, look here, right? Look at this person here is the most important thing to look at right now, right? So that's pretty much the entirety of the ad. It was like, you know, how can we diffuse light? How can we bring light back in? How can we create shape using neg, create contrast, right? Create a shadow side, create a key side, and hopefully you have enough tools to be able to make that happen. So move on. Again, I'm trying to, you know, go through this stuff as fast as possible. Now our sun is kind of in that same side, you know, side light direction, pushing all the light here, right? And we had him underneath the tree. We just have neg camera right, so we have neg camera right, just soaking up as much of this light as possible. And then we had our 8x poly camera left, and kind of an interesting thing here, right? So for me, this was perfect, right? Nice little leak of light on the edge here, nice little ratio here, and then shadow here, and depth of field, obviously, you know. But they wanted a wide shot of this, right? And the reason why I didn't go wide originally was, I'll show you the wide shot here, right? Because you have all this to compete with, you have all this level to compete with, and on the day, this was looking blown out on my small HD monitor through false color, right? This was all like, what is that? This was all like, you know, like clipping. And I was like, fuck, dude, I don't know if you can bring this back. And kind of a testament to the latitude of the FX9, like I was, you know, in post, you're able to pull this down quite a bit. And I was like, oh shit, actually there's still a lot of detail here. It wasn't even clipping, but my small HD monitor was telling me it was clipping. So no idea what's happening there. But this is the wide shot. They wanted a wide shot of the whole thing. I'm like, oh shit, okay. But the poly bounce wasn't enough to be able to push back light here. And unfortunately, again, since we're shooting on the same side where the sun is, there wasn't enough, you know, tree or shade to be able to take down the exposure in order for us to do the same trick with like the 300D and the Forza 500 shooting into our 8x8 bounce and coming and bringing light back in, right? There just wasn't enough like overhead tree coverage to make this happen. So what we did was we just had the gaffer point the Forza 500 directly at him, right? And you can see like now it's like hard light, hard light, hard light, hard light, hard light here. And you know, the agency liked it, so I said, okay, whatever. You know, I'm not gonna complain. Let's just keep rolling because we have more shots to get done, right? And the shot looks okay. You know, it's just, yeah, again, hard light coming out of nowhere. But again, you liked it, so you know, it is what it is. We're getting into later into the day. Now you can see the sun is to our right side, camera right. And again, this shot was in focus. I think I just took the frame grab that was out of focus. So, but here, just nag behind camera to again create shape, right? We had our Forza 500 off to the right side because I wanted just a little bit of leak here and also onto the ladder itself, right? So Forza 500 is to our camera right, and the sun is also again in that same direction, right? So sun here, and then we have our Forza 500 being able to kind of create little edge here, and it's creating, you know, this little edge light here on the ladder to create again as much three-dimensional shape, as much contrast, as much depth as possible. All right, and then we move on up. Now we're up into the treehouse itself. The sun is kind of just creating a room tone for us. So in order to create more shape, it's like, yeah, like, what do we do here, right? Because we're in this position where we're in a backlit position, but it's just not enough backlight. So again, Forza 500, we had it on the bed of a truck on a C-stand, just boomed all the way up, and that is basically able to, you know, create nice shadows, right? Shadows running towards camera at a pretty cool angle, right? So that's pretty much it. We didn't have anything else up there, up in the treehouse, just because there wasn't any room to put anything else up there. We move on to kind of same coverage here, right? You see the sun's right here. We're like, you know, 4 or 5 o'clock in the early evening, kind of beating down. But again, if you're in a situation where you don't have the tools and it's sort of run and gun, or maybe you do have tools, but there just isn't enough of the tools to be able to create shape. Look for the backlight, right? Look for a backlight and how to move your body, move the camera, and place the camera in such a way where it's an interesting shot. There's interesting layers, right? So we have light, dark, we have light, dark, light, dark, little bits of highlight here, little bits of highlight here, edge here, right? So, try to set yourself up for success as best as possible. And then the last shot, at least the one that we'll go over today, there's more shots, but then, the rest of them were like, we were getting into blue hour, and we had to basically just like crank up the ISO. I had to go to 4000 ISO on the FX9, and it was all kind of flat. So this is the last shot we're talking about. Same thing, right? We have that Forza 500. We have that Forza 500 on the bed of a truck, boomed all the way up, and that's able to create some contrast again from light to dark, right? So it was, I guess, a good choice on my part to be able to shoot at this angle, because now the posts here are creating like little frames for light to shoot in, right? So you get this little like slash of light here that's creating most of the interest here, and then it was just enough light coming in, too many lines, and then it was just enough light coming in to be able to create this nice little geometric shape here of light, right? And then what else? Yeah, I think again, just leading lines. How can we create leading lines into the most important part of this image, of this scene? So that is it for this Cobalt 10 spot. Hope you guys took something away from it. Again, if anything, it's really just about, number one, identifying the schedule, so that way you can move faster on the day. Number two is what resources you need on the day. If you're going to shooting exterior, do you have access to a 12 by 12 or a 12 by 20? Do you have access to a 12 by 12 on the ground for bounce, for neg, or is an 8 by 8 the biggest you can get based upon the budget? What light fixtures do you have? Do you have access to a 6K, to a 4K, to a Joker 800, or do you just have a Forza 500 and an aperture 300D? And know the tools, know how much output you can get from those, and what you can't. Right. And then just trying to find the best angles, trying to find leading lines to create interest, to point your audience's eyes into the direction where you want them to be looking at specifically. And then just on the day, be able to adapt and be able to adjust the shooting schedule to what the agency might want, what the producer might want, what the director might want, as far as like getting extra shots in. Because there were a lot of extra shots that I didn't make it into the final ad, but it is what it is. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode here. Again, if you look into the show notes, there'll be a link to my website, where we'll have the frame grabs here. You guys can look at them at your own leisure, and maybe kind of like listen along to the podcast as you're looking at the images themselves. And that's it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please rate it. I would appreciate it. Subscribe to the podcast as always, just so you're notified of the weekly episodes coming out. And I'll catch you guys in the next podcast episode. Ciao.